Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's presentation. We're scheduled to begin the presentation right at the top of the hour, so we're just a minute or so off from that. But while we're waiting for that time to come and allowing more people to log in, because we have a nice crowd coming in today, I wanted to cover a bit of housekeeping topics with you all. We are recording today's session, so keep an eye on your inbox for a link to the recording and a link to the slides from today's deck. So we'll normally get those out about a day or so after the event, so keep an eye on your inbox for that. Also, this is a pretty interactive session, not quite as interactive as maybe our unplugged sessions, but if you have any questions or comments for any of our presenters, please feel free to direct them via the chat and or Q&A window, and we'll do our best to get to everyone's questions and comments as time goes on. If we can get the word in edgewise during the presentation, we'll cover them as they come in. Otherwise, we'll make sure we get them at the end of the webinar. So if you ask a question and it doesn't get answered, make sure you stick on till the end of the webinar, and we'll make sure we try to get to everyone's questions as time allows. So with that being said, we are now at the top of the hour, and I want to welcome you all to our webinar about how to fast track onboarding to Microsoft WVD with Liquidware Essentials. We are joined today by a great set of panelists. We are joined by Marc Wolfson, who is a WVD Specialist at Microsoft. Jason Smith, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with over at, is a VP of Product Marketing at Liquidware, and Michael Torian, who is one of our Senior Solutions Architect over at Liquidware. So I'm gonna go ahead and hand it over to Jason, who's gonna start us off with our presentation.
Thanks, Ray. We're really excited about this, and it's not just about, today's not just about the fast tracking to WVD. We are really, really happy to have Marc with us directly from Microsoft, and he's going to give you an update on where Microsoft WVD is, so you fully understand that. There's been rapid progress with it in the last 18 months to 2 years, and so you'll get to see the current status of that and what your options are, and even if you're eligible and how to buy it and how to use enablements and all those things. Liquidware, we've been a Microsoft WVD partner since the project was called RDMI, Remote Desktop Management Infrastructure, and it was that move to the cloud where we engaged with that group about 3 years ago on this new generation of remote desktop infrastructure that we really got involved, and we started working to make sure that we're actively in sync and our solutions would work well and seamlessly with WVD moving forward. And just like our methodology helps you to any new Windows desktop, that's exactly our fit with WVD. So whether you're looking at transitioning to WVD, and that could be native WVD, or it could be just using your WVD entitlements, and Marc, I believe, is going to cover some of that today. We can help you in that area because, as you can see when you look down that column on this slide, we help you by harvesting user profiles and making sure documents and data are properly stored, whether that's on a file share or on the cloud, and best practices are in place so that seamless movement of users over to WVD is going to indeed be the experience, and you'll have a zero migration the day that you switch users over, and users will be productive on day one. Stratosphere, the same column, can help you by evaluating user candidates for WVD, can look for applications in use and start to let you design base images and think about your application delivery strategy for that. And when you're onboarding, that's where we can really help in the next column with Profile Unity kicking in and injecting those user profiles, being seamlessly compatible with WVD's FS Logic solution, which is a profile on disk type solution, and we'll bring in that granular profile even across OS and keep it dynamic and keep it working with FS Logics to make sure that if you change the OS or any parts at any time, or if you want to have users flow in and out of WVD or WVD entitlements on Citrix or VMware, you can indeed do that because we work with every type of way Windows is delivered. It also has compatibility for Azure-based profiles and application layer containers in there, because Profile Unity delivers applications through a feature set and product set known as Flex App Application Layering. So we can minimize your base images in that way and deliver applications just in time. It's a solution compatible with MSIX, AppV. We have convert to options to be able to bring those in on disk and load those very quickly as well. And then once you're in full production with WVD, it helps you with the ongoing management of the users, full environment management, well beyond just a profile that is compatible and works with seamlessly with FSLogix, but gives you that policy management that's secure, gives you that context awareness in the environment for those advanced use cases when you have roaming employees. Also, with Stratosphere, we can help you ensure SLAs are being met. We can monitor the user experience, and we can help you diagnose issues before they become mission critical. And then when you're ready, we can help you burst scale into more seats of WVD native or WVD on Citrix or VMware. And that's how Stratosphere can help you in the ongoing perpetual mode in that regard. Now, we'll recap these solutions again later. At this point, I want to turn it over to Marc Wolfson, and he's going to tell us where WVD, what WVD is, and the current status of the solution set for Microsoft. Marc?
Hey, thanks, Jason. Thanks, Michael, for inviting me to this wonderful session. That was amazing, Jason. You did that all without a teleprompter. I'm pretty impressed. I'm going to go ahead and advance the next slide if you could. We'll back up. Yeah, there you go. So the first question we want to make sure we get off the table is, what the heck is this Windows Virtual Desktop service that we're talking about? And so, basically, this is our marketing speak. It is a comprehensive desktop app virtualization service in the cloud. It delivers simplified management. Because we have a PaaS layer for that management. That's not something that you have to manage and control. It supports Windows 10 multi-session. So instead of having Windows Server and running VMs on top of it as traditional RDI, we can actually carve up a Windows 10 virtual machine and put multiple users on that. And there's a huge cost benefit I'll talk about in a bit. There's a lot of optimizations for Office 365 Pro Plus. As you can imagine, yes, if Microsoft has Office 365 and we're running virtual desktop, it's in our best interest to make sure that's optimized. But the other thing we've seen, and this was really critical, especially during COVID, is you can deploy and scale your desktops in minutes. We have done up to 1,000 VMs an hour deployments, and bursted out what we needed to for those work from home scenarios very quickly. There's a lot of security and compliance that I'll talk about in just a minute. So with that, but when we get down to it, what exactly is, somebody's advancing slides for me. Okay, there we go. So what exactly is Windows Virtual Desktop? There are two components you really need to think about. One is the licensing construct. So the M365, previously O365 licensing that we did for Office and Office 365, et cetera, that covers the client license for the host OS. So we get that whole weird licensing construct out of the way of, I have a Windows 10 license on my enterprise, now I'm connecting to a VDI, do I need another Windows 10 license or a VDA license? We get that all out of the way. It also covers the FSLogix entitlement. So as we've talked about a little bit earlier, when you're using pooled resources in VDI, you don't necessarily want those profiles sitting on each VM. So if a user goes from one VM, he sets up a profile, goes to another one, and then maybe he loses the data that he had on his desktop, et cetera. So instead of that, we centralize that in a central store, and we offload all those profiles to that central store so that no matter what VM he gets, we attach that hard disk to it, or the VHD to it, like another hard disk, and off he goes. It is the only way that you can license Windows 10 multi-session. Windows 10 multi-session is not available on-prem, is not available with any other hyperscaler, only Azure through WVD. It also allows the ability to run Office 365 on the cloud on VDI. That is something, again, not available on the other hyperscalers. They would have to use Office Pro Plus in a SPLOS scenario. And for those that are still struggling with trying to get off of Windows 7 because they have some constraints of their applications that don't necessarily are supported on Windows 10, we offer the extended security support on Windows 10 absolutely free, whereas on-prem or on another hyperscaler, you might have to pay for that extended security support. On the technology side, we offer the Windows Virtual Desktop PaaS native control plane. This is our secure way of trying to connect end users to their virtual machines as securely as possible, and especially in a work from home situation. And I'll talk to that in just a bit. The other component, of course, is the Windows 7, Windows 10, or Windows 10 multi-session OS, and of course, it's hosted on Azure. I'll go ahead and advance the slides, I guess, because I don't have control. Thank you. When I talked about Windows 10, the experience, the big cost benefit, and this kind of outlines it here. I don't expect you to get focused on it. You'll have a copy of these slides so you can look into this more deeply. But what you'll see is a lot of times the users are only occasionally using this, and through some evaluation with Liquidware, you can decide, hey, I don't need to allocate a single VM for each user, but I can actually have them share a system. So you can reduce your cost dramatically just by implementing Windows 10 multi-session in a lot of cases, especially light user task usage. We'll see this a lot. And that is one of the big cost benefits we do see. And if you could give me control, thank you. Okay. So on the high-level architecture, I just want to point out a couple things here. From the client, you have your choice of HTML5, Android, iOS, Mac OS, or Windows. So we have that available for you today. You connect into this virtual desktop control plane. Your endpoint that you're going to connect to is this control plane. You're not going to connect all the way in to the subscription point. So in the subscription area here, this is what you control. You can set up, all the perimeter, default routes, etc. You control all this. This is yours. This Windows Virtual Desktop Control Plane, this is ours, a PaaS solution. You don't have to maintain this or control this. But the point I want to make is from a security standpoint, the end user hits this control plane with SSL 443. Inside that is an RDP packet. The gateway then listens for a desktop to say, hey, I'm available, I want to connect. And then the gateway will marry the end user to the desktop and will relay that traffic over in SSL 443, and where the desktop the VM that is the desktop VDI will then unpack that RDP packet and do what it needs to do. The important point here is there's no ingress into what your environment is. It is outbound only. And for most security folks, they're much happier with that kind of arrangement rather than opening up their firewall to incoming RDP or other protocols. So all the traffic is initiated here and it's married up and relayed over. So you're gonna have your virtual machines. We're gonna use your Azure Active Directory for authentication. Your apps that you're going to deploy, a remote app, etc. And you're going to have some storage to store your profiles, and that's your responsibility. So if I go a little bit further here, when we look at the other options you have, if you don't necessarily care for our control plane and you have a favorite control plane you like, which may be Citrix Cloud, that's fine. We can plug in the Citrix Cloud into the control plane. You would still control your assets in your subscription. And we would put the Citrix receiver on the end clients. And if you notice, that little penguin showed up. So one of the advantages of Citrix and also VMware is you'll have the Linux client support. Currently, WVD has Linux client support only for the thin clients that we support, including IGIL and others. And the same thing happens again with Horizon Cloud. You substitute the control plane, you put the Horizon Cloud endpoint on there, and you're good to go. So you have both of those options. You're not just locked into the Microsoft PaaS solution. And just a little bit of a pointer here. The Microsoft, we don't charge for the control plane. We only charge for the resources running in Azure in your subscription. So just to clear that out, some people ask, how much do you charge for that? So when we look at the Windows Virtual Desktop, we have this platform to support the storage, compute, networking. That's what Azure provides natively. And then when we build on that, the Windows Virtual Desktop provides these features that we talked about, and the specific features we're mentioning here: Windows 10 Enterprise, multi-session, etc. And then we have and if you look at Citrix, Citrix can also provide the same idea, same features. And then as we build this out, our control plane provides these features. We've got some ways to go to catch up to the big boys of VMware or Citrix, but there's a lot of use cases where this makes a lot of sense and can work quite well. We have very large customers doing this today. But if you move over to the Citrix side, same thing. You just basically say, I'm going to use the Citrix control plane and all their features. And at the end of the day, you have the profile management, FS logics, and everything in a nice tight bundle. Everything works the same. And again, same thing if we go to same thing if I'm trying to click through these a little bit faster now. Same thing if we go through VMware. You start with the features, you build it up, you slide in a Horizon Cloud, and again, same kind of experience, same feature set. So if you're comfortable with VMware, you can stay with VMware's control plane. If you're more comfortable in Citrix, you can stay in Citrix control plane, but notice you'll get all those same benefits of the Windows Virtual Desktop. Phew, that was a lot. Okay, I'm going
so Marc,
yeah.
Quick question there. So having seen all three, Horizon, Citrix, and WVD native, I mean, as a Microsoft guy, what are your thoughts for the enterprise customer? Are they ready to dive into WVD native, or what are your thoughts on the best entry point for people that have experience with those other brokers?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it kind of leads into what we'd hope customers would do when they move to WVD, which first getting some understanding, some literacy on what is WVD and their options. But the most important next issue is what are the use cases we're trying to validate. And there are some use cases where it may be, I need this protocol. I may need to offload certain media that I can't do through WVD. It may be some power management capabilities of spinning VMs on and off that I need that I can't get from WVD native. There are third parties that add into WVD native to support that. But in some cases, we always say to customers, if you're happy with your solution in VMware or Citrix, then stay happy, right? There's no need to rebank this. Just let's help you move to the cloud, and you'll be the most comfortable. The opportunity cost is lower, and your ability to manage doesn't change. The user experience is consistent, and we would definitely support that. There are other cases where for cost containment reasons or something, I really need to look at this. And there may be use cases that we can peel off and say, yes, we can do that. And other cases where maybe you stay with Citrix or VMware. So really it's based on those use cases. And when I look at how we'd hope customers would move to WVD, we'd hope they'd move through these stages where they do the use case validation. There's a validation of why they're doing this. There's some issue, maybe it's cost avoidance for a hardware upgrade, or just want to get to the cloud and move from OpEx to CapEx, from CapEx to OpEx. What is the compelling reason to make sure that there's something behind there? Do some qualification on how we're going to design this and make sure that we can meet those designs. Then actually go into the design session properly, figuring out all the plumbing, the networking, the security aspects, and then moving into a proof of concept where we actually support this, right? And then when we do the execution, make sure we're aligned, everything looks great, and we just move into production. Unfortunately, this is what actually happened. Our customers go from topic literacy right into POC execution. And what they find is they're in the POC, it's very expensive, and they're looking, they're all these resources, the network admins, IT admins are tied up working on this thing. And then these things come up of how do I secure these hosts? Oh, I want to hairpin the traffic. How do I troubleshoot this thing? These are things that should have been worked out before we started this POC execution. But the number one thing is when we look at the use cases, having the data to know whether that use case is a valid use case that we can move to the cloud and VDI and meet those conditions, and having the right sizing, et cetera. And that's where a lot of times I get pulled in to these post-POC confusion. They don't have real data. Nobody knows how to run the queries on it. Nobody knows how to repair for this. I don't think this is ready for production. So basically, after all this hard work and investment, we end up with this, which is, how did I get here? This is not the way it was supposed to be, and for those that don't remember the talking heads, that's David Byrne. And, but that is absolutely what happens when you run into a POC without validating the use cases, without real data. And so I end up having to pull back the customer back to gathering the right data. And that's where Liquidware has been so helpful to me with many of my engagements. So you know you can't improve what you can't measure. We know that. So why do we move into a POC with no data? When I ask customers, you know, what size VM do you need? I don't know. Let's put some VMs out there and try it, and we'll resize. No, that doesn't have to be done. What's your concurrency? How many concurrent VMs do you need? You know, well, we have a shift change, and you know, let's not guess. So one of the things people don't realize is before a POC, you can put something like Liquidware on your existing systems today and start gathering all that data, so that before we start with the POC, we know where we're going. We know what critical success factors we need to overcome to make the POC successful, so that everybody gives a thumbs up that we can move to production. And that's what becomes a real accelerator. As you can imagine, without real data, you end up punching in the dark trying to figure out, you know, what could help. Maybe let's do this, let's try a different size VM, let's change the networking, let's change the storage, etc. Well, why don't we know the number of IOPS? Without gathering these data, a couple of outliers, and I had this happen to me, and I'll talk to this, but one outlier, one guy with some influence could send an email saying, it's horrible, kill this thing, right? Because we didn't plan for that and make sure that we don't have those outliers that have the influence that might cancel this. Even though 300 are happy, one person's unhappy and could really impact that decision.
You know, Mark, I'm sorry, I just would like to speak to that point real quick. You know, in the early days of VDI, in the physical to virtual transition days, that was really our sweet spot. You know, especially in the partner space, they knew to bring us in to scope those physical machines so that they could properly size the virtual environment that they were going to move to. And what I'm seeing in the field now is just what you mentioned earlier. People are bringing us in, but they're bringing us in after their POC has already gone off the rails, or worse, when their production environment has failed to scale. And we love that. We're great there. Go ahead and bring us in. But the customers and the partners that bring us in and bring Stratosphere in ahead of time get those metrics, and they know what they need to provide so that they can properly scope their VMs, so that they can properly size their machines, so that they can properly build out the necessary storage, are having tremendous amounts of success with their POCs and then going into their production environment. And it's that getting that data up in front of the project that a lot of us have seemed to have forgotten about.
Right. And Michael, you've probably seen this where a customer says, well, what size VM? And they say, well, this is the hardware we're using. Okay, great. You gave them a 1 terabyte, you know, 16 gigabyte machine. Is that what they really need? Whereas your software can actually say, you know, they really only need 8 gig. They're only using 2 of these CPUs out of the 8 you gave them. They don't need 1 terabyte of storage. You know, they're only using 256 gig of storage or something like that. And that's, you know, that's where we really need to peel it back. And you see this really big time when people start trying to do engineering in VDI, you know, where, okay, this is my, you know, I'm using this GPU, you know, whatever it is, NVIDIA Radeon or whatever it is, and I can't match that you know, with what I have in Azure. We don't have, you know, retail type boards. We have these Tesla stuff. So yeah, very much to your point of getting that real data of what's really needed on those systems to not over provision or under provision when we get into POC.
And especially, and I'll just the last thing to say, especially on that outlier, right? When you have 300 users with an over provisioned machine, and then you have the one outlier with the drastically under provisioned machine, being able to pinpoint that ahead of time, or being able to pinpoint that in the middle of the POC and then upscope whatever VM that user has can really save a project, especially
Exactly.
in, you know, in the partner space.
Yeah, let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater. Let's just set him off as, you know, he's a little different profile, and let's give him what he needs and not take everybody down. Exactly.
All right, Mark, that update on WVD was really great, and the story has come along, and so great in the last couple of years that it's far more than a story now. Now you have use cases, and we're about to go into those, where WVD is being rolled out, or WVD entitlements on Citrix or VMware, either way, are being rolled out. And I wanted to remind people how, why we're partners with Microsoft with this slide before we go back into some very specific use cases, back into Microsoft use cases here in a moment. We give you a methodology, sort of like an insurance policy, to keep the project on the rails and progressing as you go along. And that's because we can do several things. We can help you with the monitoring diagnostics by doing an assessment to look at the ideal candidates that you want to start with for a WVD project. We can look at the applications in use, the applications that you need to start thinking about. Am I going to put these applications in the base image? Maybe because that's Microsoft Office and everyone needs that, so it should be in the base image. Or maybe it's a departmental application for HR or the accounting department, so I need to think about another way to deliver that and to minimize my base images. So we also think about layering in those terms too, or using MSIX or other technologies or a combination thereof. And then you have your next phase, where we're already helping many customers, and that is the onboarding phase. And I discussed this earlier, but that's with Profile Unity. See, we can run in any existing Windows environment. That might be Citrix on-prem, VMware on-prem, could be physical desktops, it could be well-connected laptops, and get those users under management with Profile Unity, their policies, the way they're managing their user data, making sure that it's backed up, and putting best practices, whether that's so it can sync in OneDrive and also be in the cloud, or whether it's on a file share. We think those things through with you, and we give you a status on how that's going along the way. So all these things that I'm talking about serve as guardrails around your project. It gives you literally do this first with the assessment, and think about this there in the migration phase, so you can automatically hydrate your FS Logix profiles, because after all, those are going to be vanilla type profiles when you come in, almost in all cases. So that you want to make sure the user's productive, and so that Profile Unity can do that. It can run right after FS Logix and bring in a smart profile based on the user's legacy system and have them productive at day one, deliver those applications that are now being either brought in by MSIX, AppV, a conversion thereof to FlexApp, or with no isolation with FlexApp itself. And then monitor those desktops to make sure the desktop you said you're going to deliver in baselining and monitoring is indeed better than the ones that we assessed. So we can definitely tell you whether that physical desktop that you have taken that user off of in your pilot phase is better than the other desktop, or vice versa. It gives you decision support to move other departments along the way into WVD, or with WVD entitlements on Citrix or VMware, or to maybe leave them on very robust hardware on-prem. Sometimes that indeed happens. So it gives you the decision support to make sure your users are always productive throughout the way. And now that I've recapped this, we want to go into some of these use cases where Marc has actually seen the opportunity to partner with us, or working with a partner, seen us out in the wild. Sometimes it's an existing customer. We were already in there, and we're helping in the project moving to WVD.
Yeah, Jason, just you hit on one thing that's really, really important, because if you gather this data early, then you can decide which you want to narrow the number of use cases before you start massive deployments. We see way too many where we overbake these use cases to the point where, I'm trying to hammer down on 8 use cases, and some of them may not be valid. We want to focus on the highest likelihood of success with the largest transformative benefit, right? And then we can iterate on these other ones as needed, but don't block the whole deployment for the 1 or 2 bad use cases, as you mentioned. And it's hard to know what those bad use cases are if you're not addressing the data. The other thing you talked about, which is really important, is when customers think about, as I mentioned, when you set up a new profile, it hammers that VM pretty hard. And so without having your technology to actually migrate those profiles so that they're ready to go when they get up in the cloud, we used to have this really kind of silly technique of the newbie pool, where we put these people on this newbie because we know they're going to hammer VM, so we don't want them to be a noisy neighbor. Once they get their profile set up, then we'll move them over to a regular pool. That all isn't necessary. And the other thing is, as you mentioned, your intelligent profile management. So not just offloading everything in /user profiles, but saying, hey, I don't need all of this other noise. This is the noise. This is the stuff I need in this profile, and limiting the size of the profiles down. which can really help with cost savings as well, as well as efficiency. So thank you for that, Jason. Really important.
Thank you. I'm excited about these use cases. So we talked about earlier this week.
Yeah. So
we'll find the hover button, won't we?
If we can move that over now, Jason.
I think Ray's still able to drive. There we go.
Yeah, there we go. So this is one of the ones I was involved in early when I started working in my team. And so this was a customer, a healthcare account. They have 5,000 users remotely all over the country. They wanted to move from on-prem RDS, which is the typical where you're using Windows Server and RDP to get access, and everything was VPN, on-prem, et cetera. And they were, we were getting at one point about 12 users per VM, and they were pretty happy. They were looking at that. When they did the final validation and performance, it was so bad they couldn't get 2 users on because they didn't have anything like Liquidware or the logs or anything. They spent 3 days of support trying to figure out what was going on, and they got really, really frustrated. It turned out that basically the domain controller that we were dependent on was taken down by another IT part of the organization that didn't know we were dependent on it. Then they also made a change to the network where they hairpinned all the traffic. So suddenly this VM was just not performing. So I was able to prove the capability in my lab, but the customer decided it was just too risky. So the decision was pushed off for a full year. And this would not have happened had we had the support from you guys where we were measuring this and knowing this. I mean, literally, we were punching blind trying to troubleshoot this because we had no data to know what was the baseline and what changed, right? And this is going to be often really critical. So I don't know if that's been your experience, but I hate coming in at the end and trying to save the day on these kind of things because it almost never works out well.
What we say with Stratosphere is that a product like it, there's several in the market, and I would argue we have better data than anyone else out there and a better fit across our entire suite. But a product like Stratosphere, you either buy it on the front end or you call later and you have to buy it later because you're in a little bit over your head.
Yeah, and a lot of times when we do come in later and we do identify that something was missized or something wasn't configured properly, we don't get seen as the conquering heroes you might think. We actually end up validating that the customer made a poor decision, and sometimes they can take that out on the messenger. So we love it when you bring us in on the front side.
Yeah, and well, the other thing too is I mentioned the having the real data, and you guys provide really easy to read data that a senior exec can look at and just say, okay, my VMs are getting grade A or grade B. I don't have to dive into some weird score that I don't know what that means. We just know from the UX score that this is kind of the experience we have. They can validate it with real customer testimonial, if they want to send out an email and get a survey or whatever. But that is so important that we understand that sometimes we talk all speeds and feeds and we don't look at the overall user experience, which is what customers really care about. We get so focused on the cost savings and everything, and we forget that there's a balance between how much we can save as far as the cost savings and making sure that that's an awesome experience for the end users.
Indeed.
So this was really interesting and one that you guys have totally helped out. And this is another one, scrape them off the floor. This is not going well. And I hate to see this because these guys are 3 months in a POC. I can't even imagine not only the Azure spend that they were doing, but also just the opportunity cost of all the people that were involved. I think there were about 7 IT folks working on this for 3 months trying to get this to work. And because they didn't have Liquidware at the front end, they really didn't know where they were going. There was a hypothesis that, hey, if we move VDI in the cloud, and since most of our stuff is in the cloud because we're using these things like Workday or other things, that it's just going to be better. Well, it can be if you engineer it right. But they were using, for their measurement system, they literally had their end users had stopwatches, and they would measure how long things took. And they had about 7 tasks that they were supposed to do. And you can imagine how frustrating that was for these poor end user testers when the experience wasn't getting better, and keep doing the stopwatch thing. And it was really interesting. Some of the data we got, some of the outliers were they didn't understand there's a difference between a millisecond and a second. So they would put MS in there and like, wow, 6 millisecond. No, it's 6 seconds. Okay, that makes sense. So they had no logs, no data. We had nothing to uncover what's happening. So that's where we brought you guys in, and we kind of started with a clean slate. We said, let's bring you guys in, make sure that we're monitoring all this stuff and monitoring their on-prem environment. So we had a way to measure, here's your on-prem environment, and this is what they show they need, and let's make sure we size this correctly and look at this. And then looking deep into the data to understand if we're having an issue, where do we diagnose it? So some things we found was they didn't have any domain controller in Azure. So everything was going all the way back to on-prem every time they had an issue. So that would take about 30 seconds just for the screen to appear, because it has to get all the GPO updates. And those GPO updates are all of them are going across the ocean and all the way into their data center every time. There was a number of other things we found. Some of the traffic was being black hole. It went out their network but had no path back, right? So once you have this data, you can start investigating the big outliers. Why is this horrible experience happening, and go into that, and then you can get to the data and you can find out. And we fixed a lot of issues as we uncovered this. So we knew how it was supposed to look on-prem, and then when it wasn't, from that baseline from on-prem, we knew exactly where to focus. And so now we're in a really good state. They have good performance. And this is the other thing that's kind of interesting, and maybe not in my best interest. But sometimes we get in these compete POCs, and hey, how are we being measured, right? And that's always a concern when we're in a compete POC. But with Liquidware, they have the data, and they can compare the data between us and the competitor. And I'm not saying not VMware or Horizon, but I'm saying another hyperscaler cloud provider that may be providing the support.
Oracle?
What does that look like? Yeah, not Oracle, but they're not a hyperscaler yet. They think they are, but specifically GCP, AWS, or even Alibaba. So understanding that and making sure that's an even playing field, and because we feel like if we're competing on an even playing field, we have a really good chance for success. It's really hard for people to change the data going up if you have a consistent data gathering system. So in this scenario, the customer is going to make their final decision of exactly how they're going to go. Right now, they're just trying to decide whether they're going to go WVD, VMware, or Citrix. They'll probably, it looks like they'll probably, make that decision. And again, they'll be moving forward into production in November. The sad part is 3 months of this POC was wasted effort due to lack of data. Which that hurts everybody. And
we kind of laugh about a stopwatch approach, but the number one thing is log on, log off, how application open, application close, and there's some things that you can't even measure, and that's what this prospect probably learned really quick. Latency. There's no way for the end user to really see or measure that. Trace route and hop, how many hops are happening in between this environment and the other environment. And when you're in a cloud situation, it's hard to measure all that. And Stratosphere will give you data that you never really even thought about. It'll show you the bottleneck that you didn't even know was a bottleneck, that you didn't even know existed.
Yeah, and that'd be great. And maybe Michael, maybe you can show a little bit of that, a little bit later in our talk, because I think that was one of the biggest benefits, was finding that one piece and going, my gosh, what's happening here, and going through Inspector and seeing the actual data underneath so that we can figure out what to do about it and make it actionable.
Yeah, we actually do. We have a few things that we'll talk about coming up, but to that point, that Jason was saying, of things like latency and disk latency and network IO, it becomes the straw that broke the camel's back, right? A half a second's really not that big a deal. A second's not that big of a deal. 2 seconds aren't that big of a deal. But when you add them up again and again, an extra 2 seconds on the login, an extra 3 seconds on an app load, an extra 4 seconds on the next app load, now all of a sudden you're talking about minutes until productivity, and that'll kill any type of VDI, whether it's cloud or on premise.
Yeah, and like one of the common scenarios I see, one of the biggest offenders is the Chrome browser, quite frankly. You know, if you've got one user that decides he's going to leave 40 tabs open, he can consume almost all the memory in that VM for all the other users. But if you know that and you can see that, there are mitigation steps you can do to reduce that impact. You know, to limit the memory footprint of Chrome, for example. So super valuable, and you know, and I can't tell you how much this has helped us. This is another one, very high-tech manufacturing. They're moving from traditional RDS on-prem, you know, typical, you know, hypervisor, you know, on Windows Server. And they were using Office Pro Plus. They weren't using Office 365. So they were talking about the move for WVD would require them to move to M365, and was really interesting because the account team really wanted to get them on a modern M365 platform, which was really in their benefit, both from cost and, you know, converting from, you know, again, CapEx to OpEx as they wanted to do. You know, as you know, M365 allows you to go up or down. You're not, you know, committed to the number of users for 3 years like traditional licensing. But when they deployed, the performance with Office 365 and Teams was just unbearable for them. Again, they didn't have the right data. They didn't design it correctly. They had no data to actually go back and say why it wasn't performing well. So the decision was basically that Office 365 doesn't perform well. So let's stay on RDS. Let's stay on Office Pro Plus. So from our side, it was not only a loss on going to the cloud, but also a loss on Microsoft 365, which, you know, that nobody wants that decision. And in fact, the senior management wants us to re-engage because they're still looking at that as a huge benefit, and they know other customers are successful. So again, just a huge loss because of no data. So what my main point of all of these are, just do it right the first time. What is it? Measure twice, cut once, right? You know, and do it early before launching the POC. Validate your use cases. Make sure you've got all of that stuff will meet the mark, and you know, get that baseline going with whatever you're doing on-prem. So when you move to the cloud, you know what's kind of changed and where you have to, you know, deal with it. The cloud is different. There's a whole different paradigm for how you deal with it, how your networking works, and you know, there's no way to say we're just going to lift and shift and everything's exactly the same. That just isn't reality. So so again, having that baseline with that is, you know, a huge success. And so wherever we have customers that do it early and measure, we see very successful rollouts from a POC right into production. Where we don't see that, often it's either no decision or let's go into a bake-off or let's just not move. And of course, you know, for us and the benefits our customers, not moving to the cloud is probably the worst possible decision for them in the long term, especially with the uncertainty we have before us in this COVID-19 environment.
Well, and from the partner perspective, you know, a lot of times our partners and your partners are being tasked with designing and then conducting those bake-offs. Mm-hmm. So they need to not only define their success criteria, but then they need to be able to back up any recommendations that they make. So again, going in and knowing the metrics that we can grab can allow a partner to design a much more poignant and successful bake-off, and then execute that so that gives them a bigger chance at landing the big engagement.
Yeah, you know, and the thing that just drives me nuts is it's so easy to get started with Liquidware. Like I don't have to call anybody or anything. It's in the marketplace. You know, you couple clicks of the button in Azure, you know, it'll deploy the appliance. They put the agents on there. You guys made it super easy because the agents are married to the appliance. So I don't have to worry about, oh, I got to configure this to make sure it's talking to my appliance. We've got the security set up because of the way you've set up certificates so that only the agents that are tied to that can talk to that. And you know, and you have the free eval. It's you know, just, you know, go ahead, get started, check it out. And you guys were awesome at bringing in experts like Jack Smith and others that I've worked with to help us understand the data and help the customer, you know, get up and running and successful with Liquidware. You have self-paced training. You know, I mean, it couldn't have been easier. most of the time when we say, hey, customer can get an eval, okay, talk to the sales rep does the hard sell before you even get a chance to look at the product yourself. And you guys have just made it super easy to consume. And I can tell you that our customers are really happy whenever it's something in the Azure marketplace that they can just consume and not have to go through a litany of instructions to get set up in their environment.
Yeah, we like to say you can be trying out our software, for Stratosphere in under an hour, have it fully already reporting back. The more data you get in, the better your data is, obviously. So 1 week, 2 weeks, that provides all the difference in data. And then Profile Unity and FlexApp, it really only takes about an hour and a half to 2 to set that up and be doing a proof of concept and rapidly move into a pilot.
Yeah.
The update you gave us on WVD, just wonderful. We want to move into a couple of demonstrations here shortly. I've got just a couple slides that I'll go through because I know that people are really excited about probably seeing a demonstration of some of the guidance that we're talking about with these. Liquidware's Microsoft WVD focus really is wrapped around 3 things, and it's the order in which your project demands it, right? And we like to think that we assess and we help you with migration in that order, and then user experience metrics. But these are the things in not necessarily that particular order, but maybe in the order of people think about us in importance. And that's, we can simplify the application management by dynamically attaching layers. We're fully functional with MSIX and AppV packages. We could even convert those over to FlexApp layers. And when I say layers, we're really attaching an application, and from a VHD or VHDX. For an on-prem environment, that means in a file share. For a WVD environment on Azure, that means that we're hosting that on your Azure storage in a very tight container, and it's just really with a filter driver made to look like that application's running. And you'll see a demonstration of that in a moment. Speeding the adoption of WVD with that harvesting a smart profile and injecting it just in time into an FSLogix profile, which would be otherwise a vanilla experience. You'll see a demonstration of that very shortly here. I'll get to. It's hydrating that, and it's enabling that full user environment management, unifying the profile, all parts of the profile, not just user profile, but policy management, application rights management, being able to see, being able to have context-aware settings for very unique scenarios and compliance reasons, time of day, applications hit the desktop. Other times of day, maybe they don't. Maybe it's location aware, and that is that, if you're inside a bank, you have applications that you have and have access to. If you're accessing the same environment from home, you don't have those applications for compliance reasons, but you are equally as productive on your user applications. And then ensuring those SLAs are being met, and what you thought would be the experience is indeed the experience, and being able to trace down and know what the exact root cause of any performance bottleneck is at a moment's notice with Stratosphere, knowing historically how this data looked yesterday, the day before, a specific point in time, being able to support those help desk operations. When you get that help desk call, you start typing Michael Torian's name as a user, and all of a sudden everything you know about that user, maybe from the legacy environment and from the WVD environment, is flowing through, and you can compare those types of experiences and get to root cause very, very quickly, so you can solve what's going on. Comparing again, what your baseline is of your legacy environment or your on-prem hosted VDI environment against where you're looking to move. That stuff is just immeasurable, and having that as guidance along the way is always helpful.
Yeah, Jason, I just want to mention that, this is something that often my customers overlook, is the image management piece that you talked about, and simplifying that. At some of my customers, there are 8 people that are just sitting there all day long manually updating images. Oh, we got a new thing we're rolling out. And so instead of using a Flex app to deploy that app and attach it, to get people up and running, well, you got to wait until I prepare that image, right? FSLogix has app masking, so you can create a giant image and mask out some things. But there's a lot of times where app layering makes a heck of a lot more sense. And so really encourage folks to think about how much time they're spending doing that, because it's a very traditional, very manual process. We do have Azure Image Builder to create more automation, but again, not having to manage hundreds of gold images and how I'm deploying those gold images to these different VMs. Just can really simplify their lives in an operational day 2 to day 100 scenario.
Yeah, we know from speaking to administrators over many years that they would love to get to a base image that is just the OS with maybe OS patches when those occur, and the applications that all users need. Microsoft Office, for example, we can layer it or attach it, but it's going to be easier to put it in the base image. All users need that. And then you're only opening and modifying those base images at that point in time. You end up with a base image that can work across multiple departments, and then you allow the attachment of Flex App to say the accounting department gets this, the HR department gets this, and you're using that same base image, but you're not continually opening it up or risking breaking that base image if you're putting it all into one image, which does have its use case, and masking could work well in that. Flex App, you'll see an instance of that, and I think I'll whet your appetite more with the demo. So we've spoken about Profile Unity, but to recap, its strong points, it works so seamlessly with FSLogix, literally handing the profile over to the FSLogix container across OS. Windows 7 is no problem, Windows 7 to 10, and you can still deploy Windows 7 with WVD, by the way, because you don't have to pay that ongoing tax for the support of it. That's an added benefit, right, Mark? It's a WVD entitlement. That's another reason why you want to think about WVD, because you might not be ready to move off Windows 7 for applications or something like that. But with the profiles, you don't want to have a lot of mixed profiles when you do go to Windows 10, or if you're mixing Windows 10 deployment with Windows 7, and that's where we're going to come in handy, because we add those benefits to FSLogix in the fact that we go cross OS, where a static profile on a VHG, even with our own profile disk, which you can use, but even with FSLogix, is going to be tied to that OS, and we add that capability to be able to bridge those profile bridge technology through our portability and through a smart profile that goes cross OS, and then granular ability to go all the way down to system root or system drive if there's some not well-written application you want to pick up, file settings or registry settings, and make that and append to it as part of the profile. I just want to verify my camera's coming across fine. I got some alert here from.
Yeah,
getting a little bit of feedback, a little bit of pixelation.
Probably too many movements. Too many hand gestures. All right, so the other things are right there on the screen, and I want to make sure we have time for these the demos to show you this. Stratosphere UX, again, end to end, and we spent most of our time talking about this today, but this is a good summary slide. So I'm going to start with a demo here to make sure we're able to do it, and then we'll move over to Michael Torian showing you Stratosphere in real time. So as we get started with this, we have we're going to show you a user experience. We've just rolled out WVD, and the user is going to log on to a desktop that doesn't have a lot of apps, and it is an FSLogix experience where you have a robust and a very quick profile, and you'll see that in here. And FSLogix is loading now. It's loading the original profile. It's a vanilla green field profile, because that's going to usually be the use case if you don't have a technology like Profile Unity, and you'll see the two run together in a moment. And then the user hits the desktop, and they've got that base image that we're talking about. The base image is the OS. They've got a really good WVD experience delivered from Azure, and they have a few apps in here, like Microsoft Office is in the base image here. So they can do some basic things. And if this is their new desktop, no doubt they would be productive eventually, but they've got to build up that goodwill and that persona that may not be in there. And then you've got to think about the use cases going forward that really your production environment that you're bringing that user to already had. So you don't want to lose any ground. And that's where Profile Unity can help you with a smart profile harvest. And we have guided configuration wizards in here that can help make that happen. And we're going into Profile Unity right now, and we're showing some of those functions and that we can bring a portable profile and inject it. We also have Flex App in here, and these are the applications that were already packaged up. And we can simply apply those and drag and drop them over to apply them at boot time. Very fast attachments of many applications at login time. So then they flow in. You see the icons in the first few seconds of your session. And then we have a click to layer application, and we have activated one in there as a click to layer application, so you can see the differences when we activate this configuration. Because after all, we showed you what it would look like without the user having brought over their productive environment and also their apps. And now we're going to activate Profile Unity where they actually did planned this out. They just hadn't activated it in the environment fully. So we're going into Azure here, and we're going to make sure the configuration file's out there so Profile Unity can recognize it. And then we're going to apply it. We're going to have that same user log on to the environment, and you'll see the difference. A WVD environment that was delivered very nicely, or a WVD environment that was delivered very nicely, and now, watch this, second time the user's logged on to the same exact WVD desktop. The only difference is Profile Unity is going to run in here after FSLogix ran. It's going to lay down the policy management for the user. FSLogix is running now. Now Profile Unity is running in addition to that with a portable profile that's very granular. Policy management is being brought in, the user's familiar environment, and they're running a Flex app configuration that's going to bring all the applications they need to the desktop. The same exact desktop that you saw a second ago now is a fully productive environment for day one usage. Zero downtime, all the apps that they need in here by Flex app, perhaps through MSIX being brought in as a convert from MSIX to Flex app. And we also have applications in here. Some of these were brought in at boot time very quickly. A few icons hit the desktop as you saw, and we've got this one application in here that's a click to layer desktop. And when we click on Edge Chromium in here, it's actually going to connect that application in, because it may be an application that the user didn't need very frequently, but then it's going to be brought in and it's going to look seamless to the environment. You see notepads brought in. I know that's a simple app, but we can do anything from this all the way to CAD CAM. We're opening Edge Chromium down in the right-hand corner. You saw it was being attached because it was a just-in-time click-to-layer application. And all the bookmarks are also going to be brought into Edge Chromium from their previous session as well, because we keep up with that. So in other words, FSLogix would have laid down their profile from day one in that environment. We're bringing over a productive, smart profile from perhaps even Windows 7 into this environment, and the user's off and running. Now let me show you how this is not application isolation. It is truly a native look and feel. WebEx is a plugin for Outlook, has a plugin for Outlook that you want to make sure it is very functional. Teams has a similar thing. You want to make sure all these things are functional and integrated. As you see up here in your Outlook when we open it, remember Outlook's in the base image, but WebEx is actually a plugin that is a Flex app application, very tightly integrated. It knows it's in there. It's not an isolated application because it's Flex app, very native to the environment. You can schedule a meeting up and add it to this. And so you have a very seamless user experience along the way. And that's the fit, and that's the end user benefit at the end of the day, to having a zero downtime approach to rolling out WVD in a native format or with your entitlements, and having the applications that you need in that environment, because you've done that through Stratosphere, knowing which ones were needed, delivering those through layering, and you've done your homework.
And going back to that image management piece, Jason, I mean, that's just huge with Flex app, especially in POCs, but while you're trying to scale up. As a user needs another app, you don't need another image. As you add more users and you find the apps that you forgot to bring in that first segment, you're able to go ahead and add those users in, add those applications on a per user basis without having to build new images. And that just is so important to accelerating your POCs and your rollouts.
Well, I think, you know, one big thing people forget, they think about remote app or they think about MSIX app attached, but the integration, like you said, you know, how do these things have to integrate? You know, because they're not standalone in a lot of cases. And so, yeah, super important. It's
a methodology. You'll need maybe a combination of these things. Flex app's a 90% use case. There's some things you'll need isolation for, and a lot of people realize that after the project, after they're well down the road in the project. Michael's going to tell us about Stratosphere UX and show us some of the benefits that can deliver. And I know we're at the top of the hour. We appreciate people continuing to stay on with us. Take it away, Michael.
Yep, and I'm going to be pretty quick. I really just have a couple of slides that point to some of the things Marc talked about earlier in ways that Stratosphere can help when you start going into your WVD POCs, your assessments, and your rollouts. You know, I think the number one issue that people use Stratosphere for, really regardless of the platform they're on, physical, virtual, cloud, is long user login times. And there's a lot of things that can cause a long user login time, right? Domain controller response time is huge. Maybe that domain controller is in the wrong region. Maybe that domain controller doesn't have enough resources. But that's one of the things that we run into a lot, especially when we start talking about environments that are spread across multiple geographic areas, multiple Azure regions. The next thing is blocking processes. This graph here represents a typical user login, actually my user login to a WVD session. Clearly, I need to do a little bit of tuning here because that should be a smooth and low black line. Every time you see one of those gray columns, push that black line up. That's blocking a process. That means the next process has to wait to complete or to execute until the one before it completes. We can also drill down on any of those processes, find out how long they took, and find out where exactly that's happening in the login process. And then lastly, I think Mark mentioned this, just long GPO runtimes. If you take all of your GPOs from a 20-year, 30-year-old on-premise Windows environment, AD environment, since the day you moved to Windows 2000, and you try to slam that into WVD, your logins are going to be terrible. If you even do something like taking your last 2012 R2 upgrade, and you take all of those GPOs and you bring those into your WVD environment, that is going to slow your login down. We can show you how long each one of those GPOs take, and surprise, surprise, you can take a lot of that GPO activity out and run that with Profile Unity and gain huge speed benefits and performance benefits. One of the other main things that you can use Stratosphere for, again, is sizing your machines and getting performance. As Mark had mentioned, we provide a composite user experience score using elementary grade school grades and a stoplight methodology, A, B, and C, green, yellow, and red, so that you can really quickly see if that's a good or a bad user experience. We give you averages on your resource utilization, so your CPU, your memory, disk IO, network IO, consumption. And then we highlight the metrics that exceed those thresholds, and we give you the ability to drill down in and see what thresholds are being exceeded. One of the things I think Mark talked about with one of his use cases was application load time, and people using stopwatches to try to tell you how long something had taken. Well, we're able to quickly identify users with long application load times, users that are exceeding the threshold metrics that we've defined. And then we're able to drill down into those specific application metrics. And in this example, you can see we have a user who's only got one application that's taking a long time to load, but that's bringing his entire score down. We're now able to drill down to that specific process and figure out what's taking so long, and maybe does it even need to be there? Can it be eliminated to give you a greater level of performance? One of the newest features that we've introduced with Stratosphere 6.1.5, although we're about to release 6.50, is our last mile in productivity. We're able to see what's going on in the user's home office. And this has become huge in the last year as so many people have been sent to work from home. We're able to come in now and we're able to tell you what's happening at that user's endpoint, what's happening with their Wi-Fi. We can tell you how strong their Wi-Fi signal is, how close their endpoint is to their Wi-Fi radio. And then we can even get in and we can give you information on their ISP. How many hops is it taking to get to their ISP? How long is it taking? What is their throughput? And what this allows us to do is then make dashboards so that we can get a high-level overview of what's happening in our environment, what's happening as we roll these users out. And we can tell you, is this going to work with that end user's home office or with that remote Soho environment, right? Is the Wi-Fi, is the network preventing a good user experience that's somehow impacting the perception of that WVD rollout? And then one of the things that we've been getting a lot of attention on lately is our ability to get in and diagnose the remote display protocol. Now, this is something that we've always had, but with work from home, there's been a new, an increased effort into tuning your remote display protocols and tuning other things that are happening in that communication between the endpoint and between the virtual desktop. So we're able to get, general session information, the user, the protocol, information on the virtual and remote machines, the virtual and the remote IPs, but we're also able to give you IO traffic data. So we're able to say, hey, is this user having a bad WVD experience because they're running Pandora or Spotify in their WVD session and they're taking up a lot of that traffic? Or is it because they're using IP calls that are maybe hairpinning, and we need to work on optimizing what our network rules are so that they can avoid that hairpin solution. We're also able to track things like session latency and packet loss, right? Long latency times and high packet loss is going to impact a remote session regardless of how well that VM is designed. And then lastly, what's coming to us a lot is, are these users working? That was never really an intention with Stratosphere, but we now have a number of executives at our customers coming to us and saying, I sent all of my users home, they're all remote, I have no idea what their productivity levels are. Can you tell me what they're doing? And in fact, we can tell you a lot about what's going on. We can tell you how active that session is. We can tell you the applications that were in the forefront the most often, right? Were they looking at Excel or were they playing solitaire? That's the kind of information that we can provide. Oops. Oh, and I lost my marker. If we could just go back, here we go. There we go. And then the last thing I wanted to show, and I do acknowledge we're over time, is that we're able to create Power BI dashboards with our API. So you can grab any of the metrics we've talked about or any of the 5,000 metrics that we haven't talked about, and you can pull that out and pump that into interactive dashboards with Power BI so that you can give your executives and your decision makers exactly the kind of information that they need to make decisions on whether or not that POC or that rollout is going well. And then lastly, I think as Mark had mentioned, there we go. We are available in the Azure Marketplace. So if you're looking at WVD and you're interested in any of the things we talked about, you don't have to call us. I mean, we'd like it. We'd like to talk to you. But you can go ahead and you can search Liquidware in the Azure Marketplace. You can find all of the products that we discussed today and have them up and running in under an hour. And if you have any troubles, then we would suggest giving us a call.
Yep, I know these URLs are long. You can also just go to Bing or Google. You like how I did that, Mark?
Yep, love it.
And you can just Google Azure Marketplace and Liquidware, and you'll land in the area, as well as WVD and Liquidware, and you'll see our landing pages. There's a lot of other resources out there. We have a basic cost calculator out there, taking into account if you already have Citrix, if you already have VMware, and thinking about your entitlements. There's a white paper out there, and then you can find similar ones on the Microsoft side as well.
Great. Yeah, because Bing stands for, but it's not Google. And if you Bing Jason's GoFundMe page, you can get him some better Wi-Fi.
That's great.
All right.
Yeah, Ray.
Great.
So I know we're over time, but I think we've got a few questions here that maybe we can go through, and there's some comments here too. I know that Jeff is shouting out to Michael saying, nice shirt, he's rocking the same one today, so we love to see that. And Robert loved the Talking Heads reference and thought that was pretty awesome, so that's great on there. Also, Jason just mentioned some of these links are kind of long. Like I said, we're recording the session. Keep your eye on your inbox in the days following this event. Besides just the recording of the session, we'll also have a copy of the slide deck that you can go through and click the links to this. So watch for that. That's going to have a lot of great information. I know there was a lot of links in Mark's slides, especially that are great reference points. So a couple questions here. Someone asked, so a non-click to layer app loads as fast as a click to layer. What's the benefit?
So the three benefits. At boot time, if you have a lot of applications that almost every user needs in that environment, that's going to be the fastest way to deliver. Your limitations are that you can bring those in based on AD groups, not our context-aware filters. All right. If you need the context-aware filters, you want to bring them in at login time, and you can get very granular about when and where and how an application hits the desktop. Even based on a trigger point, we can bring in an application that way, and that is. You'll see the icons at the desktop in seconds as the user logs in. A click to layer app is if you have a lot of applications, and the benefit here is if you have a lot of applications, but it may be that you don't think most users will use that application, but you want it in the environment. It's like a self-selecting app store. The icon's already in the start menu or on the desktop. It's only when the user clicks that will they have a short delay, very short as you saw in there, and that application is brought in. It's an application on demand. And that's why we have 3 different ways of bringing in the apps.
Excellent. Yep. So I'm going to try to paraphrase some of these other ones. Here's a question that I think is from Mark. It's saying that WVD is currently in preview for Azure Government Cloud. Any idea when it'll be in production?
Actually, it's in production. It went GA probably about 4 days ago. So we are now in Fairfax and so the Fairfax, Virginia location, and in I believe in Texas right now. No, excuse me, I think it's Arizona actually. But yeah, absolutely, we are there, and we've worked out a lot of the issues with folks that have their Office 365 and GCC high. So please take advantage of it.
Yeah. So, all right, great. I think there's a lot of questions here that have already been answered in this session because they were asked a little bit earlier on through this. So I know we're over time. One question or a few questions that have kind of come in is some people are asking, are you planning on doing a session on this? Are you planning on, getting more granular on this? I know some of the stuff was kind of high level and we were kind of going through some of it pretty fast. So my advice is to check our events page at liquidware.com/events and keep an eye out for future sessions planned on some of the topics that you're looking for as well. Also, because you've registered for this, keep an eye out on our newsletters and look for our emails that have invitations to other events like this. I know there was a lot of positive feedback on this call for everyone. Everyone says, thanks guys, well done, great info. So hats off to all of you guys for putting together a great session, packing so much content into a short period of time. Thank you for all of that. Thank you for everyone who joined today. Again, watch your inbox for more information. And if you have anything else, reach out to us at info@liquidware.com. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Ray. Mr. Smith.
Take care. Be safe.
Whew.